Hello and welcome to another episode of In Conversation with Danbro Business. Today we're delighted to be joined by Mike Crowther, who's the CEO of Empowerment. Empowerment, if you've not come across them before, are a fantastic charity that serve vulnerable, underprivileged and marginalised people from across the Fylde Coast community. They've got a number of really interesting projects like the PANDA project, which supports young people with ADHD, and Safer Streets, which focuses on the safety and security of women and girls across the Blackpool area. In this particular episode though, we are going to focus a little bit more on Elliots Place, which is another one of their brilliant initiatives. Elliots Place was launched in 2021 in memory of Elliot Taylor. Elliot tragically lost his life to suicide, but his amazing family and friends wanted to start this project in association with Empowerment to help young men across the Fylde Coast with their mental health and ensure that no other family has to go through what they sadly had to go through. They've achieved so much in such a short space of time, and we really think you'll be inspired by this unique initiative and the obvious passion that Mike has for it. Mike himself is a super interesting guy with a story of his own to tell, and we can't wait for you to hear about the very real difference that he and his organisation are making to our local community. One quick word of warning though, this episode will touch on some sensitive and upsetting themes, but we hope you enjoy it. So Mike, if you could just start by telling us a little bit about yourself, Empowerment, and how you sort of became involved with the organisation.
Thank you. Well, I was born and raised in Blackpool on the Fylde Coast. Believe it or not, I'm 51 years old, so I was born in 1972. So I know that causes quite a shock to most people. But so Blackpool is very much in my DNA. I love the community. I love this coastal town. I also feel very passionate about it. Very often when people disparage it or talk in very negative terms about a town, is that I want to kind of tell a different story, a story of hope, story of change, and an amazing, resilient community. I myself got my first proper job in the mid-90s, with actually working in a homeless shelter. And for me, that was life-changing because I'd had a pretty good upbringing. I'd kind of been protected from the worst aspects of life. But I did want to kind of give something back. And I was looking for something to do in my life. So I actually worked in this place and met for the first time homeless people whose lives had been torn apart and had the worst circumstances. And yes, it felt good to help them, but actually I was getting a lot more from them in terms of them inspiring me, those incredible people that despite the greatest odds, they actually managed to keep living and persevering. So therefore, for me, kind of set my pathway in life, really, which was I always wanted to work within the charity sector or the homelessness sector, giving something back. And it kind of, that's what's inspired me ever since. And I kind of did a lot of frontline work for 10 years, actually working face to face with some of the most vulnerable people. And then I gradually climbed the greasy pole and got into management and leadership positions because I do have that passion and that passion for change and to lead great organisations. I came to Empowerment in 2017. At the time, Empowerment, I think, was in need of refreshing and looking for fresh hope and inspiration itself. And a small group of us got together and said, actually, we can do something special alongside the people of Blackpool and the Fylde Coast. And I've been there ever since. I love my job. I think it's an incredible privilege to be Chief Executive of Empowerment. We've now grown into a much bigger organisation. We have about 75 staff and lots of amazing volunteers as well. But the most important thing is that the size of the organisation doesn't matter to me in that sense. It's about, are we helping people change their lives for the better? That's all that matters. So
you've obviously got that as a driving force, and you mentioned there the passion that you've got for the project, which obviously this interview will showcase. Yeah. But as somebody who's leading quite a large organisation, do you think you could do that in a corporate setting? And if so, why have you never pursued that?
So I think in terms of, I'm increasingly impressed by the private sector and corporate organisations in terms of that drive, obviously, to be profitable, effective and efficient organisations, but still actually making a social and positive difference in our lives. Yeah. For myself personally, I've always thought that in terms of the sector in which I work, it's very often it's got the greatest challenges, the most uncertainty, very often we have short-term funding. We don't know how we're going to pay the staff in the next, few months, etc. And there's something about me which likes those odds.
Yeah.
Something about when it's really difficult.
Backs against the wall. Yeah.
That actually I love working within that field. And I think it is also about the culture that ultimately within our sector, within our organisations, the ultimate drive is to support and care for people. And I think that's where I feel at home, and that's where the passion comes from.
Excellent. So we spoke about in the introduction about Elliots Place and about how a lot of this conversation will centre around that. So I wondered if you could explain a little bit for our viewers how Elliots Place, the relationship between Elliots Place and empowerment, if you will, and how the charity came about, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, yeah. So the heart of the work of empowerment is listening to people's voices. We find that actually people who are going through the greatest struggles in life are very rarely listened to. If people aren't listened to, they don't get the help and the support they need. Yeah. And for some time, we were talking within empowerment about the needs of local young men who were experiencing some of the worst in terms of mental illness and the difficulties. And they had this greater barrier about this image that we have to project ourselves of men, that we can't talk, we can't be vulnerable, we can't share. And that stops us from getting the help we need. We know that actually, even if you share a problem, share something that's troubling with you with somebody who's trusted, somebody who kind of will take an interest in you, care for you, it may not solve the problem straight away, but actually it can actually help it. You can cope with it. You can get by. One of the things that, kind of really struck was actually young men in our local communities. This is not a problem far off. This is actually in our local communities. Were getting to the point where they felt there was no other choice than to take their own lives. Now, I feel very passionate that actually we need to create local communities and change the way we do things, that young men in our communities don't feel that lack of choice, that this is the only thing they can do. And I believe powerfully that actually if we create cultures and safe spaces where young men can share, can talk, be vulnerable, and try to cope less at that stiff upper lip thing, etc., and actually share those things, then we can save lives. And not just save lives, we can actually unleash the incredible potential of each of those young men. So we're having conversations about that, what can we do? Because at Empowerment, we're always thinking what we can do next and I was approached several years ago now by the family of Elliot Taylor. And Elliot was a young 24-year-old man who had everything to look forward to on the outside. Popular man, friendly, successful in what he was doing. And yet he felt he had no choice but to take his own life. That's tragic. And that is just so sad. But this incredible thing happened that his family, his mum, his dad, and his sister came to see me a week afterwards. And they were absolutely in the midst of their shock and their grief. And I have no idea what they were going through. And yet something in them said, we want to do something to help with the families. We don't want any of the families to go through what we're going through. And we talked about that current lack of support for young men, both in terms of the culture, which didn't support them to talk, but also, well, if they did open up, where they're going to go, where they're going to get that help and support. And we have many hard-pressed and a lot of demand for our statutory mental health services. And unfortunately, the experience of many young men is that even if they take that brave step to try and get help, sometimes they have to wait a long time and sometimes just don't get the help and support they need. So we talked about what could we do together, and we came up on this plan of actually developing Elliots Place. This would be developed and run inspired by the memory of Elliot. Elliot is our inspiration to help with the young men. And we didn't want to create a service. We didn't want to create a place where you had to make an appointment and you had an assessment. We wanted to create a community of young men, all of whom felt comfortable talking and sharing about their mental illness, about their struggles and vulnerabilities, and they would support each other. And suddenly this incredible fundraising campaign happened. I've never seen anything like it in terms of the thousands of people who donated. We've managed to actually secure a bespoke building just for Elliots Place, which is the Elliots Place,
which looks
building.
fantastic as well.
Yeah, it is fantastic, welcoming space, and that's in the grounds of the of the empowerment offices in Bispham. But Elliots Place is also a community. And it is about, we've got 2 staff there who run a series of activities, drop-ins, in which young men can just be themselves, get the help and support they need, take part in fun and social activities. But the most important thing is that they're in an environment in which talking and sharing about mental health, there will be no stigma, there is no shame, there's no bigotry, no misunderstanding. They will be accepted and welcomed. And we believe that's the fundamental offer we can make to the young men of Blackpool and the Fylde Coast to provide that safe space.
It's an absolutely amazing project. Since it started then, how many sort of young men have you been able to help? And also, what's the process of, say, a young man approaches you, hopefully through this podcast, finds you guys? How do they, what's the journey for them?
Yeah. So now we've worked with over 100 young men.
Wow.
Actually, I checked yesterday because Uncle and yours could be like here.
And it's only a couple of years that as well.
It's absolutely a couple of years. And we could only do so much, and we always set out not to be a big, massive service and project. We wanted to keep it small, local, friendly and warm. And those are the kind of the principles behind it. We also didn't want a really formal process of referrals where somebody had to present for an assessment and then someone completes a 98-page document, which is then sent to us. We then assess it. We then ask them exactly the same questions.
By which time the problems got worse as well.
Absolutely, that's right. And we know that actually even the process of telling your story again and again and again can be re-traumatizing. So actually what we've done is we've advertised and we've promoted the work of Elliots Place. And what we find is that the most majority of young men who find us actually come from a recommendation, from a friend, from somebody they were talking to, or perhaps from an organisation that they've got some relationship to. And it's as simple as this. They turn up and we make them a brew and we have a chat. And it's nothing more difficult than that.
Yeah.
But the person they have a chat with is somebody who understands, somebody who's friendly, who's glad to see them.
Yeah.
And it's done in that non-clinical surroundings. It's just in a nice, safe, comfortable space. And from that, we actually want to listen to the story of that young man, to tell us their story, as much or as little as they want. But we kind of gently coax those people to kind of start talking about what's troubling them, where struggles have come from. And from that, they start opening up. Now, it's up to the young man themselves further help, because if they can just continue with the activities, they can come just drop it in for a brew. We're not telling them what to do, it's at their pace. And for some, if this is the first time they've ever opened up, then actually it's going to take some time. They have to keep coming back, building up the trust and confidence. And then if they do want to kind of get further support from a doctor or from a mental health service, or even kind of get into work or try volunteering, our staff and volunteers can help them do that.
Yeah.
And that's the amazing thing, because very often people then get to that point, actually, I'm feeling better and I want to make a contribution myself. What can I do? And that's a scary thing. So we accompany them on the journey as well. But it's all about what that young man needs at that time and what's going to work for them as well. Yeah,
no, it's amazing, and it is bridging a massive gap as well. Across the website and literature and stuff, there's a phrase that I've seen quite a bit, start small, grow tall.
Yeah.
So what's the end goal for Elliots Place? Is there one?
I think in terms of, that's start small and end tall is really, really important to us, is that don't promise the world. Don't promise you're going to change everything. Don't promise you can support everybody, because that's not realistic. So start with small. Start with actually doing piecemeal changes. Even if you're working with 2 or 3 people at a time, you're working with 2 or 3 people at a time. We don't know what the end of Elliots Place will be, other than we're going to be here for a long time because the needs need to be met. What we want to do is actually Elliots Place be the first of a number of places across Blackpool and the Fylde Coast. And we don't need to run them. Young men can run themselves, or other organisations can do them. The point is not being precious about this. We would like, in every single ward and area of the Fylde Coast, safe spaces for young men to talk, drop in and share about their mental health. So we want to we call it about a movement. We're at the start of that. They are in other places in the country. We're certainly not the first, but in our local area, especially for young men. And I think, it's important to say that men of all ages are affected by mental health. And of course, women are. All people are affected by mental health. But that starts small, is we've got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And inspired by Elliot, that's really about young men.
Yeah.
Because we also believe that with young men as well, we can actually begin changing the culture, giving them those skills and their confidence to share those things. So Elliots Place, who knows where it's going to end, but we're not going to stop. And the vision is this, that every single young man on the Fylde Coast can get the help and support they need when they need it, with whom they want it from, and they don't have to wait.
It's so important because the statistics are pretty grim, as I'm sure you're aware. And like you said there, everybody's affected by this, but particularly young men in this area. Are you finding that with the work that you're doing?
Yes, and I think it's the thing with, again, we'll go back to with young men, is that it's this culture which we need to break as well. So obviously this is reflected in the behaviours of individual men, but actually, you don't need to kind of look too far on social media to see that actually there are perhaps role models emerging for young men who do not see vulnerability or sharing your emotions as a positive thing. In fact, the very opposite. I find that a very worrying trend. Especially the amount of traction it's actually getting. Absolutely. And young men who perhaps are looking for that inspiration, looking for that role model, looking for, well, how should I lead my life? And we're very impressionable. Young men are very impressionable. I was looking for those role models, looking for, well, who's going to inspire me? And if they actually then make that choice, actually, that person there, that's the way I want to lead my life. But that young person, that role model is saying, don't show vulnerability. Don't talk about your mental health. Man up. All those things. And a lot worse other things as well, I'm trying to keep it decent for people watching this. We need to very strongly give a counter to that. We need to give a very strong message. Is that, and I always say this, is that being a man, you can express in 1,000,001 ways. I'm not bothered about that. Express it in whatever way you want to. But being a man does not have to mean being strong in the traditional sense, not talking and sharing, not being open, not being vulnerable, because that way leads to mental ill health and it leads to young men dying. So we've got to give that hope and inspiration. And I think it's incumbent on people like myself, who I struggle to describe myself as a young man. But what I do know is that for most of my life, I was struggling with mental health issues. And at the age of 18, I actually got my first diagnosis of depression. And I didn't tell anybody. And I didn't take the medication. And I just ignored it. And I then spent the next 20 odd years going through life, outwardly successful, doing all the right things, but inwardly having these, what I now know to be bouts of depression, of anxiety, and of having real struggles, trying to get out of bed in the morning, having the motivation, and really feeling that sense of dread very often. It's only when things started to go wrong in my personal life, and somebody persuaded me to go and see a counsellor. Well, a counsellor is somebody that I always thought was for other people, and I'd always encouraged other people to go and see a counsellor, but I never went myself. But I went reluctantly. And for the first 2 sessions, we pretty much spent me saying, actually, this is not for me. This is self-indulgent. Actually, there are people who really need this help. I shouldn't be here. By the 3rd session, and she was a very skilled counsellor, very good. And which does make a difference. It does, absolutely. I'd come to the realisation that actually what I was experiencing was depression and anxiety. And that was an absolute light bulb moment for me. It was an amazing moment, funnily enough, kind of accepting that actually these feelings I had, the struggles I had, because I had this mantra that life is tough and you just got to get on with it. Life is tough and you just got to, and now life is tough. And sometimes we have to show it and get on with it. Some of that's true. But I'd also coping. I was a brilliant coper, but I coped miserably. And actually what you start doing, that sadness or that suppose that feeling, feeling of miserableness and dread, you then communicate to others. You know, those nearest to you kind of experience that as well. So from that, I actually went to the doctors and got a prescription, and I started taking antidepressants, which I'd absolutely been against before. Within about a month, my mood was started lifting. I was getting into the habit of talking and sharing. And I came to the conclusion not long after that is that I am not going to ever deny that I have depression and anxiety. It doesn't define me. You know, I have a lot more to me in life, but actually I'm not going to live with the shame. I'm not going to live with the stigma. I'm going to talk. Now, I don't go talk to random strangers myself, but actually anybody who asks me, I will say that to this day, age 51 in 2023, I still have a diagnosis of mild to moderate depression with anxiety. I am still medicated, and I still regularly go to talking therapies.
Yeah.
I also lead a very successful organisation, and I love my job, and I'm able to function and do all those things that everybody else does. I also know myself that if I feel I'm slipping, I talk and share, or I have good people around me who notice. I also I run a lot and cycle a lot and try and get out in the fresh air as much as I can, because I know that's good for me and it lifts my mood as well.
And a lot of Elliots Place is physical activity.
Exactly the same thing, absolutely. So all those ingredients, actually I can't change my diagnosis. I hope one day it goes. You know, I don't want it to stay around, but I manage it. But fundamentally is that I talk and I share. And it's the power of that I know that my life is so much better than it was. So much better because the shame and the stigma pretty much gone. Yeah. You know, I can talk here. What I've learned from my own lived experience then is actually the way to actually rebuild young men's lives is actually at a younger age. I don't want them to get into the 40s and 50s before they feel they can open. Yeah. I don't want them to actually feel there's no other choice but to end their life. There is another life possible. And we need to model that and inspire young men into living that life. Because ultimately, we want the best lives for people. Yeah. We want people to really have amazing lives. And I think it's possible for everyone.
No, it's an incredible message. You mentioned there about lived experience. So we're going back 30 years there to when you got your initial diagnosis. So you'll have seen the good, the bad and the ugly of the system, as it were. Yeah. How important is that and the other guys that work on Elliots Place and in empowerment in terms of transferring that to help the guys that come through the door?
Yeah. Lived experience for me is the game changer in how we do things in terms of services and projects and helping and supporting. Yeah. That's not to say that people without lived experience don't have a positive contribution. Of course, we all have a positive contribution. But what does that lived experience give us? It gives us, I think, compassion because you know what it's like. Therefore, you use that power that you've got of the pain and the suffering you yourself experience to actually say, I don't want you to go through the same by yourself. Yeah. I am by your side. So lived experience comes passion, a real passion to help and support. And it's not a job, it's a life, it's a lifestyle.
It's a calling almost.
Absolutely, yeah. I would absolutely call it a calling, absolutely. I think the other thing about lived experience is what we're finding is that when the person who's actually kind of providing the support opens up a little bit about themselves. Now, when I first started in services and both in delivering services and managing them, we were always taught, don't share anything of yourself. Yeah. Don't show anything of yourself. It's all about the person. So, you know, people would ask me questions, oh, Mike, do you have any children? Well, I did. And I used to say, well, I can't talk about that. I'm here to support you. Right. What we find is actually that's not good at all for forming a trusting relationship. So, of course, everybody who works in our sector, they have to keep themselves safe and there's stuff they don't need to share. But if we open up a little about our own lived experience, this magical thing happens. That person on the other side feels they can open up to you. Yeah. Why? Because actually they have this feeling that you're going to understand.
Trust.
Trust. That's the word. You're not going to judge them because you've been through that yourself. Yeah. So both in terms of the passion it gives you and also in terms of that ability to make trusting relationships. But the other aspect about people with lived experience is actually they've got lived experience both of conditions and of mental illness, but they've also got lived experience of services. And therefore, for me, they have that lived, not just experience, a lived expertise in how services and support should be delivered.
Yeah.
So the exciting thing is that people with experience are leading the transformation of how we support people. So for me, lived experience has to remain an absolutely crucial and essential element of all projects going forward. At Empowerment, we took a decision some time ago to actually stop really asking people about their qualifications, although they're important, but what life experience did you have, which means you want to come and work at Empowerment and support other people. And we now have many, many people on our payroll who have lived experience of mental illness, lived experience of domestic abuse, lived experience of being in and out of prison, of being on the streets. And they have turned their own lives around with the right support. And now we were harnessing that energy at Empowerment to help and support other people as well.
But you've talked there about the perhaps negative online influences. Well, then if somebody who's got that lived experience if they can inspire the people the opposite way. Obviously, you guys are making a massive impact locally. I don't know if you work with businesses particularly. This is obviously a business-related podcast. Is there anything you think or that you've seen that you think businesses could be doing more of or be doing better to help people with their mental health and engage more on this issue?
Yeah, and I think, there's organisations, and I'm not just saying this, but Danbro, which have impressed me in terms of that very enlightened and very compassionate attitude towards mental ill health. There are some fantastic employers on the Fylde Coast. Businesses and corporations want the best staff. Simple as. They want the best people to come and work for them. I believe passionately that some of those best people will have mental illness.
Some of the best people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, if you have a track record of a mental illness and you see a job being advertised, perhaps even the dream job, perhaps even the job of kind of an organisation you've heard lots about and I want to go and work for them, then I know for a fact that people will be thinking, well, should I tell them about, actually, I do have depression, or a few years ago I had to take some time off because I actually went through a really bad time. And we know that people sometimes don't tell the truth because they're fearful. They're fearful of telling the whole truth about themselves. Well, what if I tell them, is that employer going to say, no, you can't have the job? Or even if they found out when I was actually employed by them, would they then actually ask me to leave? And these are very real fears. And I think we miss out potentially on some of the best people. So I think, in terms of the smarter employers who are increasing in number are those who say very publicly and openly, we will be a friendly and supportive place for anybody who has a history of mental illness. And I think if businesses can communicate that, both in terms of the websites, the publicity and promotion, but especially when they're recruiting, to say we positively want applications from people with a history of mental illness. And that when you come for an interview, you will be treated with kindness and respect. Listen, you'll still need to impress us. You'll still need to be the best person for the job. And people such as myself don't want that kind of special treatment. We want to be just given an equal chance. That's all. I think if then you can communicate that, you're going to get the best people. You're going to get people applying with a history of mental illness. And actually, when they're in the organisation, sometimes they will need a bit of flexibility. Sometimes they will need to be able to share or talk about their issues in the workplace. And what we found is actually if you do that, actually your sickness levels go down, your retention levels are driven up, and you get the best people. So I think anybody kind of in terms of working on the Fylde Coast and is managing or leading a private company, I'll give very serious consideration to say actually what more can we do to actually attract and retain those people with mental illness, because your business will be better as a result of it, I would say. Absolutely.
And a bit more broadly, this one, if you had a magic wand to change one thing about mental health support nationwide, as somebody who's steeped in all this, what would you say that would be?
Simple as is that in terms of, I know there's always cost pressures for all aspects of, if we talk about the NHS, but actually billions upon billions upon billions of pounds are spent on treating physical conditions. My vision and my dream would be that as a society and as a nation, we decided that actually we would treat mental illness with the same seriousness as we do physical health conditions. And that would be a massive, beyond belief, expansion of services, of support, of funding going in long term. You have a golden opportunity when someone actually gets to that point where they say, actually, I need help with this, we need to respond quickly. Part of that is no one should wait longer than 48 hours for support. No one should have to be on a waiting list for 3 to 6 months. So the magic wand is we as a society actually say, for the first time in our history, we're going to treat this with the equal seriousness we do physical health.
And do you think we're way off that at the minute?
We are way off that at the moment, but I think we are moving, because I'm an eternal optimist. I always think things are getting better, which doesn't always make you so popular in some instances. When I look back in terms of how far we've come in the 30 years, when I first went, I'll tell you a story. When I went to that doctor's, because I'd pretty much been made to go by my mum to doctors because she knew there was something not right with me. And I went into that doctor's appointment and 18, didn't know anything other than I felt really bad about life. And I said, the doctor said, well, what's wrong? And I said, my mum thinks I've got depression. I don't think I have, but my mum thinks I've got depression. And he looked at me and he said, in my experience, son, young men have depression because of 2 reasons. Either it's a woman or it's money. Which one is it? Well, it's neither. He lost me. He completely lost me because it didn't make any sense to me. So he just, without any, there's no further conversation, he wrote out a prescription, gave me some tablets, and I walked out, and I didn't talk about my mental health issues probably for about another 27 years. I was going to say, that probably put you way back, didn't it? Absolutely. So when I look back to that time, which doesn't seem that long ago to me, and to where we are now, we are in a much better position. We've progressed a long way, but we still have so far to go. And going back to, what I said at the beginning and about Elliots Place and why we need that, if the vision is that no young man has to take their own life because there is an alternative, there's a different way, we have to keep going until that becomes a reality. Absolutely.
Is there a postcode lottery element to this as well? I mean, why, for instance, is Blackpool's statistics so high comparatively with other towns?
So it is a postcode lottery. And I think, Blackpool also did experience a huge reduction in its funding over the last 10 years, which meant that services have been really hard pressed and there's been high demand. We also struggle in Blackpool and the Fylde Coast sometimes to retain our best staff. So there are some real struggles there. But also Blackpool and our areas we know is still the place of hope for a lot of people. People are going through struggles across the country, especially in the northwest. And there's this tradition that Blackpool is a place where they had a great holiday, where they enjoyed themselves. So when people are going through the toughest of times, very often they make the decision to come and live in Blackpool because things will be better there. Unfortunately, the reality is different. And those problems which they had living elsewhere, they actually come with them. So therefore, we do have this, I suppose, this larger than the national average number of people coming into Blackpool with those mental health conditions. But what I would say, and I would always say this, is that that's true. I think what is equally true is that Blackpool is also fortunate in having some incredible people who want to make a difference as well. Such as yourself. Well, that's for other people to say. But I think we can't be naive to say that actually Blackpool, when you look at the statistics and the national figures, we do have higher than above average, in terms of physical ill health, mental ill health, suicide rates, they are higher. But what that means for me and people like me is we just need to do more and keep working until actually Blackpool is a place where anybody with a mental health condition gets the help and the support they need and can rebuild their lives. And I'm really passionate about when people have kind of got to that point where actually they feel a bit better, where they feel a bit more in control of their own life. That's the opportunity for them to give something back. And I see this as a cycle where actually the support you want to receive, you then give back to others. And that's a good society. And everybody can do that. I'm only the person I am and what I've achieved in life because other people helped me along the way. And I think we all need to acknowledge that we've all got a role to play. Even a positive conversation, even a smile, even an encouraging word for somebody could be the change that can actually change somebody's person's life
Yeah.
for life, and we'd all need to do that.
No, that's a really important message. There is a sense of irony when you're talking about health statistics and there's a siren going off in the background. We'll just gloss over that. You mentioned again, some of the personal bios that I've read around yourself. Is it social pedagogy?
It's not easy to say. So
no, it's not.
Social pedagogy, but it can also be pronounced pedagogy, which doesn't help.
And human learning systems, is that the one? Could you tell us a little bit more about those two things?
Yeah, so I mean, I did, I've got a degree and I've got an MA. I did that about 20 odd years ago, and I really enjoyed those things. But then just about a few years ago, I decided to go back into academic study. And because I felt a little bit that I wasn't being challenged enough, that I needed to I like new ideas, and I like, kind of creativity. And I felt, no, I need to kind of find out what else is going on, what can inspire me, And I'd heard a colleague talking about social pedagogy, and I thought, well, that's a mouthful. What is that? And then they said, well, actually, there's an MA in it we can do, and an MA in social pedagogical leadership, which gives you no clues whatsoever as to what it is. Okay. But social pedagogy is basically about our education, and how we learn and develop is best done in relationships with other people.
Yeah.
Okay. And that it's not about a personal peer who's imparting information into the mind of that person. Actually, you learn together. And the pedagogue is somebody who actually is teaching another person.
Okay.
Therefore, social pedagogy is you're teaching each other, you're learning from each other all the time. And I found that quite exciting, really. And in terms of social pedagogical leadership, was actually you lead through relationship.
Okay.
And if you have really good, strong, trusting relationships with the people you lead, then they're likely to do the very best job, because they'll feel trusted, they'll feel empowered. So social pedagogical leadership is about learning or even identifying those skills that, instead of actually, if you employ somebody, you shouldn't be micromanaging them. You shouldn't be telling them every single day what to do. You should say, actually, this is the job. This is the support we've got. I trust you. I'm here if you need help and support. Now go and do your best.
Were you in, can I ask, a position of leadership when you started the course?
Yeah.
So did that philosophy completely change, or were you perhaps practicing some of the elements of it beforehand?
I was practicing some of the elements, but actually I call myself a leader in recovery. Okay. So what it happened was it gave me a voice and articulation about how to lead, because previously, and this was linked actually with my approach to mental health and talking, is actually, as a leader, you didn't show vulnerability. As a leader, you knew all the answers. As a leader, it was your job to tell everybody what to do. And you find after a while that actually doesn't work, actually. People that around you don't feel trusted. They don't feel empowered. They don't grow and develop themselves. So for me, it kind of really inspired me into saying, actually, well, if I want to be this great leader, this amazing leader that I want to be, actually, you need to trust people through relationships, and they need to trust you. So there's far less hierarchy. The buck still stops with me. Still got to make tough decisions at times. But actually, leading now is much more fun, because actually I can trust all these amazing people around me just to get on with the job, and I'm there when they're needed. Human learning systems is very much about how we deliver and develop services. And human learning systems reminds people that at the heart of it is a messy, complex human being. Okay, so we can't have one size fits all bog standard services. It's got to be wrapped around the complexity of that person. The learning is about, we never fully get all the answers, so we shouldn't pretend that we have the answers to everything. Everything is a learning moment, and especially failure. So things go wrong. We get things wrong. And what we shouldn't do is cover up. What we shouldn't do is deny. We should admit them, because we're human. But we need workplace cultures which actually encourage that. So I make, it's not a competition, but day on day, I will make more mistakes than anybody else, okay? So if anybody comes to me with one of their, well, Mike, I've done this, I've done that, I've usually done about 17 things a day, probably worse than them. The point I'm trying to make is that actually that learning thing is, what did we learn from that? What actually can we learn? Okay, that wasn't great, that didn't work, so what can we learn from that? Not blaming, not shaming people. Actually, what do we learn from it? And then the system is really actually, we have a whole complex of different services and projects all helping different people. Very often they don't talk to each other. Very often they don't share information. Sometimes they're in rivalry and competition for each other. The systems have to actually be based on relationships as well. Everybody within this community, whether you're from the public sector, whether you're from the charity sector or from the private sector, have positive relationships with each other to help and support people.
Yeah.
You know, people working for Danbro, I want them to know about the support we provide at Empowerment. I also want the people at Empowerment to know the services that you provide for local people.
It's cooperative, isn't it?
So it's all about relationships.
Yeah. I think that's really important because there's kind of an ethos of the higher you climb up, say, a corporate ladder, because the stakes are higher, the less mistakes you can make, kind of thing. But I think if as a leader you can show that everybody's fallible.
That's right.
So in all your years working on community projects and in organisations like Empowerment, what would you say is the most important thing or the biggest thing you've learned about people?
That you never really know them, and that the biggest mistake is to make decisions about their life thinking you know them. So the thing I always learn is get to know that person or get to know those people. How do you do that? Safe, trusting environments. Everything comes back to relationship. Now, if that person feels safe with you, they then feel more open to talk and to share. And then for us to kind of develop and deliver those community projects, they're more likely to work because they're actually based around that people. 20 years ago, and I've always been an ideas person. I've always known, I'm always coming up with ideas, 90% of which are not great, but actually I get very excited about them. But they were always my ideas, which then we kind of created a project and will support people that way.
Yeah.
And then I was surprised when they didn't always work. Well, I'd never actually asked the people who were trying to help about what their ideas were. So that's the biggest learning for myself is find out what that person needs through trust. And then everything comes back to that lived experience through relationship. The themes are all the same.
Yeah.
None of this is complicated. None of this is actually clever.
Yeah. The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Absolutely. Perfect. Absolutely. And in a vastly evolving world, both in terms of technology, which helps us to do incredible things. And I see them as positive advancements. But as human beings, we will always need other human beings.
Yeah.
And we need to act like human beings who are kind, who are welcoming, and actually take an interest in people.
Yeah.
And especially we are at our best as human beings when we journey alongside someone going through their toughest times.
Yeah. And
we see them come through those tough times, and we see them grow and develop and flourish. That's the best feeling ever, and we need more of that.
That's such a good answer. One of our final questions is one that we ask everybody. So how would you define success, both from a personal perspective and in terms of what's usually a business, but obviously for your organisation, both Elliots Place and Empowerment?
Yeah. In terms of success, then actually for me, and empowerment is not the size or the growth of the organisation. It's about our ability to genuinely change people's lives for the better. I've gone through all my life, all sorts of success indicators, key performance indicators. All that matters to me is that somebody can tell me their story, that when they came to Empowerment, they were going through their worst times, that they were struggling, that they'd given up hope. And yet they met someone from Empowerment, and within weeks and months, they had fresh hope and their life has been changed. That is the only definition of success. When they themselves tell me my life has changed for the better. And then the icing on the cake is when they tell me, and you know what, I'm volunteering at a project myself now because I want to help others. Yeah. That's success.
It's that circle of life element to that, isn't there? So last but not least then, hopefully there's people watching this who, well, I say hopefully, but you know what I'm getting at, who might need that support. Absolutely. If there is, how do they go about getting that? How do they get in touch with you guys? Whether that's for Empowerment, because obviously we mentioned in our introduction that you do other projects as well, but perhaps specifically for Elliots Place.
I think the easiest way in terms of Empowerment and for Elliots Place in any of our projects is really, if you are familiar with the internet and with social media, it's just Google Empowerment Blackpool, and you'll find all our website and our social media presence, and you'll quickly find a pathway in terms of how to access our support. You can pop into our empowerment base, which is at 333 Bispham Road in Blackpool.
Opposite Moore Park.
You can ring us, you can email us, you can drop us a line on Facebook. There's 101 ways. Whichever way suits you best, please just get in contact. What I guarantee, and it's a guarantee that we have to make across empowerment, is if you make that brave step to get in contact with us, you will be welcomed with kindness and with warmth, and we will want to have a chat with you because we want to help. So please do get in contact with us.
No, thank you so much for that, Mike, and thank you so much for coming in as well. Really appreciate talking to you, and it's been fascinating hearing about it. Hopefully, as we say, it's helped a few people as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.